So now we're going to start talking about the data analysis portion of the UV transmittance apparatus data. Once you have your data exported and you open the file, it will look something like this in an Excel sheet. So you see we have a timestamp here, as well as your intensity measurement in watts per centimeter squared. And then you also get that same value in a minimum, a maximum, as well as its average. And it's important to note that if you're doing your experiments in the fast setting where you get one data point per 30 milliseconds, all of these four values will be the same at every timestamp, and you can see that across all of these different data points here. And that's because the data collection is happening so fast that there isn't really time to obtain a minimum or a maximum or even an average. All of these values are just strictly the same. So it doesn't matter which one of these we use. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to use the regular intensity one for today. So to get started, initially what you have to do is just start setting up your columns. So we're going to have time in seconds, and we're going to have our UV transmittance in watts per centimeter squared. From there, we can take this column here, where we have our watts per centimeter squared intensity, and we're going to essentially copy all of those and paste them in our UV transmittance. Actually, I'll go back for a second there, paste them here, and I'll explain why in a few. So the next step then would be to look at all of these values that we have just pasted in. So initially, in every experiment, because the data collection is happening so fast, we're going to have some not useful data initially, because this is where the UV light has not been subjected to the sample yet. So where these values are 0 or very low, we will just delete those and shift our column up. So then next, we're going to go to the bottom and see a similar thing. So when the UV light turns off, you can see that the intensity starts to drop off, but isn't exactly 0, but it's not data that we want to keep. So we're going to see where that starts to happen and take all of those data points and delete those as well. From there, the next step would be to see where this last data point ends. So you can see that it is at 1938. So let's keep that number in mind and go back to the top of our sheet. So now we are going to take that value and essentially do 60 divided by 1936, because that number was 1938, but we have these two extra cells right here. So we're going to subtract 2 from that number and get 1936. And the reason why we're dividing 60 by 1936 is to get our time intervals per each of these data points, because we ran this experiment at 60 seconds. So in doing so, now we have collected this time interval, which is approximately 30 milliseconds, and we are going to insert our first data point of 0 for the first time and the first time step. Then we're going to collect and copy that time interval that we had just determined and paste it in as a value only. Now we're going to drop down and set that for the entire sheet, and you can see it goes all the way to the bottom and sets our last data point at 60 seconds, which is exactly what we wanted to do. So now going back to this empty cell for the UV transmittance that I had left there from the start, essentially what you would put here at 0 seconds is the value of UV transmittance that your sample provides when it is not polymerized at all, when it is not subjected to any UV light. And essentially the way that we gather this is by using an external standard. So this will be specific to your specific sample. So you're going to take your sample without any photoinitiator added into it and do a separate experiment where you see what intensity values are given off by that sample without any polymerization happening. From that value, you then can insert that here at whatever given intensity of UV light you used. And for our specific sample, our external value was found to be 0.00103. So I'm entering that in there. And now I'm going to set this whole column to general so that we can see the comparison of our data points with that external standard. And now our data is ready to be exported into Origin, to be plotted and cleaned up for presentations or anything else that you might need it for, which will be outlined in another video.